Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then they came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. The people were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. In their synagogue was a man with an unclean spirit. He cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him and said, "Quiet, come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed him, and with a loud cry came out of him. All were amazed and asked one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." His fame spread everywhere throughout the whole region of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord. Since last March, I've been driving back and forth to Phoenix. I do a lot of work in Arizona, and I used to fly. Not anymore. Now I drive. So it's great. Drive time is great learning time, right? You can listen to a lot of stuff. It's fantastic. And kind of leading up to the election, I got to admit I was way too much heavy into listening to political stuff on my 6 hours of driving back and forth to Arizona. And I think it took a toll on my attitude. So my New Year's resolution was to kind of get back to some good Catholic study. Picked up a bunch of the CDs from up in the vestibule of the church. Snuck in one day and got some good ones. There's some really good talks there. I highly recommend you do that if you have time to listen to CDs and talks. But this last week, when I was on my trip, I listened to a podcast, and it was an interview of Dr. Scott Hahn, who is a fantastic teacher, has been for many, many, many years in the church. And he was being interviewed about his new book called It Is Right and Just. And it's a book that I'm looking forward to reading. I haven't read the book yet. But just from that interview, and actually I heard 3 interviews on different podcasts of him about the book, saying the same thing but in a little bit different ways. I found it to be really helpful, and I want to share a little bit about what I heard. Because as I'm talking to people, even now, I keep hearing a lot of anxiety and worry that people have about the direction that our culture is going, the degradation of the moral fiber of our society. In Scott Hahn's interviews, the things that he said reminded me, which I needed to be reminded again, of our core mission, my core mission as a Catholic, as a follower of Christ. And it helped me, the things he said, to be a little bit less worried about our society and the future of the world by reminding me why we have hope. I needed to be reminded. So I'm going to share a few ideas briefly from that interview I heard from him, and then I want to reinforce the reason for our hope, taking the points from today's readings. So Dr. Scott Hahn was talking about the virtue of justice, which is the highest of the virtues, and he explained that justice means giving to another person what is their due, what they are owed. So basic justice, you might say, is we follow the laws of driving. Okay, so when I stop at a stop sign, I'm rendering justice to other people by driving safely. Same thing like I go to the grocery store. When I pay for my groceries, I'm participating in justice. I'm giving to everyone else what is their due, that I follow the basic rules of society like they do. A little more complicated and involved would be social justice, which involves equity and fairness for all people, the respecting of human rights, individual rights. But then the highest justice that he talks about is what he calls transcendent justice. Now, this involves relationships where I cannot pay back to a person what they are due. So the most basic example would be parents. So my parents, our parents, all of our parents, they give us life. We can never give back to them what they gave to us. It's impossible to give them back what they're due. They give us love, food, clothing, shelter, everything. that we needed to survive. So in justice, we do what we can. We honor our father and our mother. This is the virtue that comes out of this justice, this transcendent justice of giving back to your parents what you can, what they need, everything within your power. Another form of transcendent justice is what we owe to our society in general, which gives us an opportunity, a place to live, a place to work, a place to raise families, kind of a framework for us to live and to thrive. We can't give back to the society everything that it provides for us, and so in justice we participate in what we call patriotism, which would be to honor our society by working for the common good, maybe by volunteering to help in some way the society in general. Maybe it might be volunteering for military service to serve our society in that way, or some other kind of public service. So as good patriots and as good patriotic Catholics in our society where we are here, what is it that our society needs most from us? Well, what it needs from us, the greatest gift that we can give to our society, that we owe everyone who lives in our society, and this would be true for any society, anywhere in the world, the greatest thing that we have to give is to live our faith fully with joy, because that's God's plan. That's why God's called us into baptism, right? And in this way, we express the highest form of justice. Now, the greatest inequity where we cannot give back what we owe is where? It's to God. So what we do is we do religion. Religion is the debt of justice that we owe God, right? God gives us every breath, every friend, every loved one, our whole culture. What can we give back to God? We offer to God what God asks us to do. We offer sacrifice. As we pray in Mass, let us give thanks and praise. It is right and just. It is our duty and our salvation, always and everywhere, to do this. So what is it then not to thank God and give God praise or even acknowledge God? It's not just ingratitude, it's not just ignorance, it's an injustice to God. This is the source of anxiety in our society. Religion, the praise and worship of the transcendent and supernatural God, the highest form of justice, has been thrown aside all too often. Too many people think that religion is just not relevant to justice in the modern world. Now, this is not a new problem. 2,000 years ago, St. Paul, when he wrote to the Romans describing the culture in Rome at that time, he said, claiming to be wise, they became fools, exchanging the glory of God for the likenesses of mortal men. It's a typical human problem, sinful human problem. And you notice that in Rome, and like in any other society, the people who put aside God, or religion, they're really not putting aside religion. What they're doing is they're just practicing a different kind of religion, an idolatry. They're worshiping the wrong thing. They're giving thanks and praise for the wrong thing. I see an overemphasis on thanks and praise for science and reason. Now, there's nothing wrong with science and reason, but if you stop there and you don't move to God, to the thanks and praise of God, then yes, that's a very serious problem. And it becomes evident in a society that this is happening when people who do give thanks and praise to God, to this transcendent and supernatural God, those of us gathered here today, we're told what? To keep it to yourselves. It doesn't belong in the public square. But we are called to listen to Jesus. That's what Moses said in the first reading. He said, as great as I am, this great prophet of Israel, there's going to be one who's going to come, and it's him you're going to need to listen to. And it's Jesus who comes then in the gospel reading. He shows up in the synagogue there in Capernaum. So realizing that religion isn't just the duty of individuals by listening to Jesus, because that's what he said. It's the duty of communities, nations, societies. Many modern leaders say that religion poses a threat to society. But we know that religion is a virtue not just for me individually, but it includes my spouse, my children, my grandchildren, my friends, my community, my parish community, even my nation, my society, any nation, any society on earth. In fact, we call ourselves Catholic because Catholic means universal. It's bigger than even a nation or all groups of nations. It takes in the entire universe, heaven and earth. That's Catholic. That's our faith. Now, when virtues are eliminated or ignored, when people don't follow the rule of law, the most basic justice, when the protection and the rights of people are violated, especially vulnerable people, when people quit honoring their fathers and mothers, when there is no patriotism, and especially, most especially, when there is no religion, society devolves into a kind of self-destruction, a bit of a chaos. And I think that's some of the anxiety that I see and hear from people when they take a look at what's going on with religion in our society. So, to not acknowledge God publicly by giving thanks and praise is unjust. Our society needs us to return fervently and more completely to our practice of our faith. But this public nature of religion is something that, unfortunately, even many, many Catholics have lost their sense of. So many Catholics stay away from Mass now, and it's like, and I hear this from people all the time, well, I don't get anything out of it, And that's not why we're here. We're here because it is right and just to give back to God what God requires of us. And in this virtue of justice, all society will be blessed. So we owe it not just to ourselves. It's not just something to make me feel good, but it's something I'm called to do for all people. All too often, we're more American than we are Catholic, or whatever your nationality may be, And as Catholics, we're citizens, of the country that we come from, but we're most importantly citizens of heaven. So we have this blind spot where we've grown comfortable with the idolatry. And we think that we can publicly worship science and religion and then only privately worship God. And we don't realize that's a problem for everybody. Jesus made it clear what our mission is in his Great Commission at the end of Matthew's Gospel when he said, go and make disciples of all nations. Notice he didn't say, go and make disciples in all nations. Make disciples of the nations. So we're not just called to convert individual people. We're called to convert every society, every nation on earth. By doing what? What did he say? How do we do this? By baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. All nations are called to be sacramental societies. This is what God desires. This is what we strive for and pray for. And then Jesus goes on to say, teach them all that I have commanded you. And most importantly, the command to do this in memory of me. We need to rekindle the desire for our Catholicism, to once again work for a Christian social order, a Catholic civilization. I must admit, even as I say this, it almost sounds impossible. And I'm sure there are people who are thinking, you got to be kidding. Or there are some people who even think, oh, no, that can't be true. Well, I'm always encouraged by Mother Teresa, who said, don't worry about success, just be faithful. Brothers and sisters, let's just be faithful. This is where the message of today's readings really helps with the hope. Because Moses was the greatest of all Israelites, right? And Moses knew that at the end, that he was not going to be the one that was going to raise up Israel where all nations would stream together to worship the one true God. This was the goal of Israel, right? The goal of Jerusalem. And Moses knew it wasn't going to be him. And come to find out that it was none of the Israelite judges and none of the Israelite kings and none of the Israelite prophets were able to pull this off. No one until Jesus. And that's what Moses said. It's not going to be any of us who have been called to do this, any of us normal people. It's going to be him. You listen to him. He speaks with real authority. He has power over his creation. There isn't anything that Jesus points to that wasn't created through him. He has authority over all things. That's where our hope comes from. Because We only need to be faithful to what God commanded us to do, and we leave the heavy lifting of bringing all societies into a sacramental civilization. We leave that heavy lifting to God. I don't know how to transform every nation into a sacramental society. All I know how to do is to be faithful for myself, for my spouse, for my family, and to spread that out as far as I can. We gather together, strengthened by the right and just worship of God. We transform ourselves, our marriages, our kids and grandkids, and in this way we send grace out into the whole world. If you get worried or anxious, remember to focus not on your sphere of concern. You may have a big concern about what's going on. That's what I was kind of getting wrapped up in that. But to move the focus away from my sphere of concern to my sphere of influence. Right? Bloom where you're planted, as we've said many, many times, right? We throw our little pebble in the pond and let God deal with our ripples to take them out. And by doing this, we have a long view. As Catholics, we always have a long view, okay? We're planting forests that are going to benefit our grandchildren's grandchildren. Can this work? Can all nations be made disciples? Can every society be made sacramental Catholic society? Well, I think back 2,000 years ago, Jesus in that gospel, when he walks into Capernaum, there was nobody but him. Soon he had a couple fishermen, tax collectors, and zealots. And from the backwaters of Galilee, he told them, go and make disciples of all nations. This was at a time when all nations were members of the Roman Empire, the preeminent culture of death. What were the chances that this could happen? Yet, against all odds, some 300 years later, the church was the primary structure of Roman civilization. And what happened in the centuries that followed has come to be known as Christendom. And it wasn't just the martyrs who did this. It was regular married couples. It was the helping and caring for of orphans and widows, especially at times of famine or pandemic or any other trouble. So a little faithfulness goes a long way. Our job is to be faithful, to give God thanks and praise, to throw our pebble in the pond. What Moses couldn't do, what we cannot do, God has done before, and God will do it again.
So we now have a dismissal for the catechumen and candidates.